Welcome back to the show, Whitney.
Hey, great to be here, Jimmy.
Whitney, you ever think of changing your name to Whitey?
No.
Okay, I was just
I've
curious.
thought about using my middle name though, because I live in Latin America and I have to explain my name by saying I have the same name as Whitney Houston, and I've gotten very tired of that.
See, that's what I'm saying. Go with Whitey.
She should have went with Whitey Houston.
Whitey Houston. That's what I would be. So you live in Chile. Is there less surveillance in Chile?
I don't. I don't really have illusions of privacy for like really any country at this point, because I think a lot of the tech that anyone uses really in any country is Silicon Valley dominated, and all of those companies have deals with signal intelligence agencies in the U.S. and elsewhere, right? So I don't know. I mean, Chile's not perfect, but I definitely think it's a little, some of the surveillance tech, like, street cameras, facial recognition when you're walking on the street, that kind of stuff isn't really here yet the way it is in like some US cities.
Is it easier to protect your children from propaganda there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, my kids are pretty young, honestly, and
Okay.
I kind of try and curate what they watch and stuff. And my daughter goes to a school that's pretty like free thinking, encourages critical thought and like art and stuff. So I mean, that's nice that you kind of have the freedom to choose different schools like that.
Why do you think so many people who are able to see through the COVID lies are unable to see through the government propaganda on Israel?
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Well, one thing that I think is kind of interesting and that I've thought about and talked to some friends about is that I think there was an effort during COVID to sort of prop up a certain class of people who were telling the truth about COVID, but then to have them at the same time sort of rebuild trust among specifically like Trump's base and people like that for like neocon foreign policy. So you had groups like Steve Bannon's War Room, for example, basically saying that everything that happened with COVID was the CCP, even though the Trump administration was doing like the exact same policies, and later the Biden administration, and sort of trying to link it with these different policies. And a lot of these neocons from back in the Bush administration or around that era, people like Frank Gaffney set up websites like stopvaxpassports.com, and we're trying to sort of like rebuild trust by being critical of the COVID narrative. And then they regain that trust that they lost, in past eras like the Iraq War era, and then they're sort of able to be like, hey, look what's happening now, and manufacture, consent with that particular group for what Israel's doing right now. But I think it's not really working so much, because so much of Israeli propaganda is about dehumanizing Palestinians. And during the COVID era, people that didn't get vaccinated, that didn't submit to lockdowns and stuff like that, were also dehumanized. So a lot of these people are like, wait, well, I think there's more people anyway that, maybe sort of see through that tactic, because it just happened to a totally different class of people all over the world, right?
Yeah, I couldn't. That's a good observation. Yeah. Well, let's get into. There's been some recent revelations. Now, this is from Michael Schellenberger, and he wrote this article. I'm going to show yours also. CTIL files. Number one, U.S. and the U.K. military contractors created sweeping plan for global censorship in 2018. New documents from new whistleblower shows. And the subheadline here is whistleblower makes trove of new documents available to public and racket showing the birth of censorship industrial complex. It came in reaction to Brexit and Trump election in 2016. Now, that's when the establishment lost control of the narrative and democracy actually happened. And when people voted, they voted for Trump and then they voted for Brexit, which are two things the establishment did not want. And so they had to quickly snap into their plan of grabbing back the narrative, right? And a big part of that was this new censorship industrial complex. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And then also, in the same period of time, another thing that was happening around that same year or so is that Microsoft launched their what they called the Defending Democracy program. And one of the parts of that, main components of that, was called NewsGuard. which was a major censorship effort as well that I think was launched in
Yeah.
2018 also. And basically was a built-in sort of like a pop-up, I guess. You'd go to a news website and NewsGuard would tell you if it was trustworthy or not. And they were very suspect and funded by a bunch of, private advertising companies and, big corporations and stuff, and have sort of been outed for being, not just like the CTI leak here, censoring people just for having different political opinions, not really going after fake news, more about narrative control, which is pretty consistent with, most of this, industrial censorship that's been going on.
So I just heard Tim Pool mentioned that he uses NewsGuard.
I was going to hold back from saying it.
Really?
Yeah,
he
and I'm
brought
like,
it up. That's the first I heard of it was him saying NewsGuard was good.
I never heard NewsGuard was good before, but I think he uses that to show, hey, look, even their approved press is telling me this stuff.
I think I've seen him since say it's not that as good, but this is the one that you're supposed to use.
Yeah. So let me just.
Who says you're supposed to use it? Microsoft?
Sure.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like Peter Dow tried his own version of that too with Verit or something, and but he didn't have Microsoft behind him, so it failed. But here from this article, the whistleblower alleges that a leader of CTI League. What does CTI stand for? Cyber
Threat Intelligence.
The whistleblower alleges that a leader of cyber threat intelligence. It's so.
When they formed, they called themselves like the Cyber Justice League. I mean,
it's like right out of a
absurd.
Saturday morning cartoon when I was a kid.
I like how these elections were our Hamas election.
Yeah, that's right.
You can never have power. You're never allowed to be part of democracy again. You voted Hamas, Trump, Brexit. They're all the same thing.
Trump and Brexit.
Yeah.
Is that like they're Hamas? So the whistleblower alleges that a leader of the CTI League, a former British intelligence analyst, was in the room at the Obama White House in 2017 when she received the instructions to create a counter disinformation project to stop, quote, a repeat of 2016. So there's Barack Obama's White House joining up with British intelligence and, of course, our own deep state. And I'm sure Mossad, because the deep state in America is Mossad. And what is this all about? This isn't about getting rid of disinformation or conspiracy theories. This is about making sure that someone who comes from outside the two political mainstream party systems never gets to do that again, and that people never get to express their will in their vote ever again, right? Isn't that what that says to you?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. But actually, if you read Biden administration documents on this kind of stuff, they say things like they essentially say people can't disagree anymore about politics. People disagreeing and debating politics is supposed to be normal is a sign of discord and threatens democracy and all of this stuff. So I guess we all have to agree 100% of the time about everything.
So this idea that the Democrats and Barack Obama are about democracy is exactly backwards. Barack Obama serves the same people that George Bush and Dick Cheney did, serves the same people that Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton did, the same people that Ronald Reagan did and George Bush the first, and now Joe Biden and Antony Blinken do. They serve the same exact billionaire class, military-industrial complex, WEF, those Bilderberg, those same handful of billionaires that run everything. They serve them. Barack Obama was a fake. He was a complete fake. And it's funny to still see people who see through a lot of conspiracies and see through a lot of the propaganda say things like Barack Obama was the best president of my lifetime. Yeah, he was the best actor president of my lifetime. He made you feel like he was a real president.
Real West Wing feel.
Yeah, he can pull off a real West Wing feel, as Kurt just said. But he was serving the exact same nefarious interests. His entire cabinet came from one email from Citigroup, and and the reason I know that is because Julian Assange revealed that through WikiLeaks, which is why the establishment, including Barack Obama, have been trying to kill him ever since. Okay.
Yeah.
So moving on a little bit more in this article, so the ambitions of the 2020 pioneers of the censorship industrial complex went far beyond simply urging Twitter to slap a warning label on tweets or to put individuals on backlists. The AMIT, the adversarial misinformation and influence tactics and techniques, called AMIT. So that's adversarial misinformation and influence tactics and techniques. Their framework calls for discrediting individuals as a necessary prerequisite of demanding censorship against them. And so I've experienced this. So I knew that when the Bill Gates funded fact checkers on Facebook would do a bogus fact check of some of my, whatever it was, whether it was COVID or the vax or lockdowns or about Syria or whatever it was, that was a prerequisite to get me completely banned and then also to get our financial services cut off. So that's the game that I could see that they were doing that. I'm like, why would they care about this? And why would they have this no-name journalist try to fact check me? Oh, I get why they're doing this. They're setting the predicate so they can censor me completely if they needed to and cut off my finances, right? You're hip to that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the financial services has been their big angle so far, but they definitely have plans to escalate. So the DOJ, the FBI, and the Secret Service of the U.S. right now are part of this public-private partnership that's under the, operates under the World Economic Forum, but it's run by a career Israeli spy, and they want to label anyone that publishes misinformation online as a cyber terrorist, essentially a cyber criminal.
And so,
is the term.
And so, because Barack Obama repealed the habeas corpus, he basically did that in the National Defense Authorization Act, Section 1021. What that means is if they say you're a terrorist, meaning if you protest against a pipeline, they call you an environmental terrorist.
Eco-terrorism.
You're an eco-terrorist. If you protest, if you put something they consider misinformation on the internet, you're called a cyber terrorist. So if they consider you a terrorist, they can throw you in jail, what's called indefinite detention, meaning they don't ever have to give you a trial because they've already determined that you're a terrorist. So this idea that, again, voting for Joe Biden or Democrats is saving democracy is the exact opposite. It's ensuring that we'll never have democracy again and we'll always live under authoritarian rule. I just want people to know that. I think people who watch this show know that, but maybe somebody is watching this for the first time.
That's not what democracy is, Jimmy. Democracy is when you have really diverse MCU characters.
Yes. So the sum total of the documents is clear. So you just mentioned this, that it's a coordinated, sophisticated effort by the United States and UK governments to build a domestic censorship effort and influence operations similar to the ones they have used in foreign countries. In June 2018, this woman named Jane Terp, by the way, she spells her name Jyne. Never trust a Jane that puts a Y in her name. In June 2018, Jane Terp attended a 10-day military exercise organized by the United States Special Operation Command, where she says she first met this guy Brewer and discussed modern disinformation campaigns on social media. Wired, the magazine Wired, summed up the conclusions they drew from their meeting that misinformation, they realized, could be treated the same way as a cybersecurity problem. So somebody hacking into your database or somebody trying to shut down.
You hacked my narrative is what they're saying?
So they're saying if you have a counter narrative, that can be treated the same way they treat an actual hacking of cyber.
So reality is more classified than... That's great.
Yes. Brewer went on to describe how they first thought they were getting around the First Amendment. His work with Jane Terp, he explained, was a way to get non-traditional partners into one room, including maybe somebody from one of the social media companies, maybe a few special force operators, and some folks from the Department of Homeland Security to talk in a non-attribution, open environment in an unclassified way so that we can collaborate better, more freely, and really start to change the way that we address some of these issues. So this was their attempt to get around the First Amendment. This is their attempt to bring people in from social media in with intelligence operators and to censor people. When asked whether Terp or the CTIL leaders discussed the potential violation of the First Amendment, the whistleblower said they did not. The ethos was that if we get away with it, it's legal, just like the mafia. And there was no First Amendment concerns because we have a public-private partnership. That's the word they use to disguise those concerns. Private people can do things that public servants can't do, and public servants can provide leadership and coordination. And now,
So fascism.
so when the government wanted to censor, they would set up a private censorship organization like they did at Stanford University. And they would say, oh, no, that's Stanford University do it. They're private. But it was in coordination with the government and the deep state of the United States and the UK. And so here's your article, which is at Unlimited Hangout. Now, you wrote about this. So Michael Schellenberg is getting to it now in 2023. But you pretty much wrote about this in 2020. You were way ahead of the curve. Here's your meet the IDF-linked cybersecurity group protecting U.S. hospitals pro bono. And
that's well, that's
For
nice
free.
of them.
Yeah.
Wow, they say they're ruthless, but I mean,
So,
then they go and do this.
anonymous volunteer. They called themselves. They're volunteering to help.
Is this? Do we have the dumbest country on the face of the earth?
Yes, we have the most propagandized, that's for sure. Anonymous volunteers from an opaque group founded by the former commander of Israel's Unit 8200 have been granted access to some of the most critical private and public networks in the United States healthcare and pharmaceutical sectors.
That's great.
With the help of the U.S. federal agency, now run by a former Microsoft executive. You wrote this in August of 2020.
Yep.
So, and here's another article. Oh, no, this is the same one. So
Same article.
hardly any media attention has been given to the dramatic and unsettling changes that have been made to a hospital and healthcare information technology systems and infrastructure under the guise of helping the United States healthcare system cope with the surge in data, as well as an unsettling uptick in cyber attacks. Now,
Yeah,
were there really an uptick in cyber attacks, or did they just say there were so they can do this?
This was this was allegedly happening, and I wrote this during the first year of COVID, right? But this alleged uptick in these issues where the healthcare system IT-wise couldn't cope was because at the exact same time COVID was happening, the department, HHS, cut their budgets for IT for hospitals around the country. So basically, like putting them in a position where they would be overwhelmed, and then this group run by a guy that's basically still an Israeli intelligence operative and people at Microsoft with ties to the national security state in the U.S. come riding to the rescue to offer their services for free to hospitals and the pharmaceutical sector. And then they expand to chemical plants, dams, and nuclear reactors. And so then they later get involved in censorship, which is what Schellenberger covers. But their CTI League has been doing a lot more than just alleged misinformation stuff.
So this is real.
Sure.
This is real Brave New World 1984 stuff. That it's all about controlling the It's all about controlling information. It's all about propagandizing, and it's all about censoring anybody who has a counter narrative to what the establishment wants.
That's a cyber attack. If you're saying the wrong thing.
If you're saying the wrong thing, they're going to treat it as a cyber attack, literally. So the surge of cyber attacks combined with major budget cuts has made hospitals even more vulnerable, as many are compelled to do more with less. As a result, there have been a renewed push for the improvement of cybersecurity at hospitals, clinics, and other healthcare institutions throughout the country. Amid this backdrop, an odd group of cyber threat intelligence analysts with ties to the U.S. government, Israeli intelligence, and tech giant Microsoft have volunteered to protect U.S. healthcare institutions for free and have even directly partnered with U.S. federal agencies to do so. They've also recently expanded to offer their services to governments and social media platforms to target, analyze, and neutralize alleged disinformation campaigns related to the coronavirus crisis. Well, son of a bitch, they're just good-hearted volunteers, Whitney. What problem do you have with these people?
Yeah, well, the fact is, there's a lot of problems. One, the guy that created the CTI League is a guy named Ohad Zaydenberg, whose entire career at Israeli intelligence was attacking Iran. And then he leaves formally Unit 8200 and works for this Israeli state-affiliated cybersecurity company where he focuses on Iran. He says it's a strategic intelligence target. And so he's still basically doing what he did in Unit 8200 for this private company, which he was at the time he created CTI League. And he has been, since CTI League was founded and before, blaming Iran for a series of cyber attacks conducted against the US critical infrastructure and other systems, and also accusing them of misinformation campaigns with little to no evidence. But you get this headline that'll say stuff like, Iran hacked this, Iran hacked that. But if you actually read what Zadenberg's claim as to why it's Iran, he'll be like, medium to high probability it was Iran because this person's believed work history, so like not even confirmed work history, is similar to a previous operation conducted by an Iranian group that they don't specify and they don't say what the overlap is. I mean, it's just whatever. So anyway, this guy has been attributing attacks to a foreign power for a long time, and specifically Israeli intelligence for years has had basically unlimited funds and powers to try and goad the US into striking Iran first, so Israel doesn't have to do it first, either via a preemptive strike or some other, attack on it for the purpose of advancing regime change in Iran. Or if you look at what's going on with Israel and Gaza right now and the possibility this could spread to a regional war. If it does, and they want to get the US involved, it's not that hard with a group run by Ohad Zadenberg being in all of our critical infrastructure systems. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And then being like, oh, the country I've been blaming for cyber attacks my whole career is responsible. Also, why are we letting a foreign spy into our critical infrastructure?
Free. It was free.
Because it says volunteering and it's for free.
Well, you don't like a deal?
Right, it's for free.
So here you say, while these analysts have claimed to have altruistic motives, its members who have identified themselves publicly have notably dedicated, just as you said, much of their private sector careers to blaming nation states, namely Iran, but also China, for hacking and most recently for cyber attacks related to the coronavirus crisis, as well as the 2020 presidential campaign. So that explains why the child pornography I found planted on my hard drive was in Mandarin with a strong Hebrew accent. Am I right? So
the idea an Israeli is going to do that kind of work for free just out of the goodness of their heart. I know a lot of Israelis. That's not a thing they do.
I think you're trafficking in anti-Semitic tropes right now.
No, Jews are very generous. Very generous. I said Israelis. No, they don't. They look at us the way we look at Canadians. Like we're kind of pussies.
Yeah. So the final slide from your article I'll read is, these individuals and their employers rarely, if ever, make their reasons for assigning blame to state actors available to public scrutiny, and also have close ties to the very governments, namely the U.S. and Israel, that have been attempting to gin up hostilities with those countries in recent years, particularly Iran, suggesting a potential conflict of interest. So
potential.
So we have to go to you to get this information, and we have to go to Michael Schellenberg to get the whistleblower talking about the censorship wing of this. Why do you think this isn't being reported to the world's #1 news journalist, Rachel Maddow? Why isn't she reporting this? Or Sean Hannity? He's always got his finger on the pulse.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that corporate media, the same people that essentially own corporate media, own our politicians and own, influence a lot of, what gets censored and what doesn't get censored by the state, I think essentially, basically the U.S. is a giant public-private partnership, and they work together to decide how to keep the little people down at the end of the day, right? So corporate media, in the U.S., it's the line between being corporate media and state media, I think, is like, it's essentially the same thing.
It's like a CBC.
At this point.
Yeah, they
toe the line, and they'll never not toe the line. If you're talking about like cable TV news, like the big channels and stuff, they just don't cover this stuff. And they definitely don't, very rarely criticize Israel. I mean, it's taking, an underestimated 20,000 death toll in Gaza to get like some light criticism of Israel, of the IDF from CNN and stuff. I mean,
What about their hurt looks that they make when the Israelis show up on American TV? I don't believe any of the videos of destruction. Watch the actual Israeli people, politicians coming on American TV and openly saying the craziest shit. It's like right after I just got done hearing what a madman Putin is, the same channel, I'm watching a guy go, yeah, war sucks.
Yeah.
You got to kill civilians. Dresden,
we got to do
right?
it. Dresden. We got to. Hey, Americans did Dresden and they did Nagasaki, so we're going to do this to Gaza. I mean, you got war. This war is hell. That's
And then
what.
they just sit there looking hurt.
And then Will Flitzer goes. He makes a sad face. So
He used to work for APAC, didn't he, Blitzer?
yes, of course he. Yes, he did.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Jake Tapper wanted to. So how much in control is this deep state, this international deep state of the Mossad, UK, and the CIA here in the United? How much in control are they, you think?
You mean of what? Of like the U.S., of global happenings?
Yeah, of yes.
Influencer stuff.
Yeah, so I think
Douglas
it's
Murray?
actually a lot bigger, frankly, than just, the US, UK, and Israel, though I definitely think that's like a very core group. So let's take, for example, the stepfather of Anthony Blinken, the man that raised him, Samuel Pisar, right, who was also Robert Maxwell's lawyer and best friend. Samuel Pisar testified to Congress in the early 70s and said that what was happening at that time was what he called the rise of the trans-ideological corporation, where the big corporations or the big CEOs and oligarchs, basically, of the West were going to the people that owned state-owned companies in the East, like communist Russia and China, and making deals with them to create the trans-ideological corporation, where there would be basically a group of businessmen that would run the world and would make national sovereignty completely irrelevant. And a lot of this group is essentially trying to do that. And I think that kind of explains why you have every country in the world, including, in the Russia-China sphere, and then also in the West, following the same playbook with stuff like COVID-19. And pushing for all this stuff like digital IDs and central bank digital currencies and all of that stuff at the same time. So, I mean, there may be like, these hostilities between, the West and the East in terms of, geopolitical tensions, but there's a lot they agree about at the end of the day. And that is because you have this group, this really, hate to use this word because QAnon ruined it, but basically a cabal of businessmen, basically directing a lot of policy because they have the money and they have the power, and they've been accumulating that for a very long time, right? So this is the guy that raised Anthony Blinken, by the way.
Wow.
That was telling that to Congress, and a congressman asked Samuel Pisar if he thought this trans ideological corporation was good or bad. He was like, mostly good. But basically, I mean, it was basically a plan to something like that. Yeah. And it was definitely tied up with like organized crime in the US. You had like Chicago mobsters and stuff sort of involved with this effort too. You had Israeli intelligence assets like Robert Maxwell, and you had all these, different actors involved, and they've been doing a lot of stuff, for a very long time, and are a big part of the deep state in the US and Israel, which honestly, I've argued for years, the US national security state. I try not to use deep state that much because it's really, military and intelligence, right? Generally speaking, like the most unaccountable parts of government. So the US and Israeli deep states, national security states, have essentially fused, I think. I think it's really a binational national security state. You can't really separate one from the other anymore. But you can see this stuff about the trans ideological corporation even in that too. So like one of the ways Samuel Pisar, when he was testifying to Congress, said this was going to happen, or it was happening, was through technology transfer. So Israel, because of its special relationship with the US, gets all this US military tech, but they've passed a ton of that to China, right? To sort of like equalize the playing field, but it's part of this sort of plan for transnational global governance at the end of the day. So a lot of these guys, in order to push through the agendas they all agree about, like digital ID, CBDCs, need there to be various types of catastrophes to sort of implement the the types of infrastructure they need for this sort of global governance by the trans ideological corporation to come through. And so digital ID is like a huge part of that. And so is this programmable, surveillable money that we're seeing being implemented everywhere. So,
wait, did you say they leaked it to China, like on purpose for China to like reverse engineer it or something?
Yeah, they literally passed it to them.
So
since like
a Roswell event, but to help China have UFO surveillance.
It started at the end of the 70s and went through the 80s and 90s, even before Israel had official diplomatic relationships, a relationship with China. It's actually the reason Epstein was visiting the Clinton White House in the mid 1990s so often, was because that was what was going on there also.
Have you read that? Guy Richard Grove, he sent me that
yeah, tragedy. I'm familiar. Mm-hmm.
He sent me that Tragedy and Hope book by Carol Quigley about the development, and the guy writing it's the same kind of thing. He's writing the history of this like shadow gun. Sounds exactly like what you're talking about that Cecil Rhodes started.
Yeah,
and he's for it. He's like, why is this a secret? It's going to be great, a new world order. And then he found out they didn't want him talking about it.
Come see us do a live stand-up show. We'll be in Venice, California, Palmdale, California, Omaha, Des Moines, Milwaukee, Lansing, Bend, Oregon, Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington, Boston, Massachusetts, and we're going to Europe. Do you live in Europe? We're going to be there. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all those tickets.